was born on April 25, 1954 in Blackpoint, Andros Bahamas, one of 8 children to Ishmael and Daisy Rahming. As he traces his life from Blackpoint, Andros to Brougham Street in over-the-hill Nassau, then Yellow Elder Gardens to educator, journalist, and author, first Bahamian criminologist, politician, entrepreneur, diplomat with distinguished careers in the public service and private sectors of the Bahamas, it is evident that he was destined for greatness. In this episode of Bahamian Heritage Series, Ambassador Dr. Elliston Rahming.
My full name is Elliston Rahming, and I was born April 25th, 1954. My parents were Ishmael and Daisy Rahming.
Okay. Did you have siblings?
Yes, there were 8 of us.
Mm-hmm. Their names?
Clarence, Charles, Lennis, Malfred, myself, Ernest, Rosetta, and Ivy.
Okay, so you came kind of like in the middle?
Sort of in the middle, yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know my maternal grandfather, but my grandmother lived with us for a period. She continued to live in Andros, but whenever she came to Nassau, she lived with us.
Okay.
And my father's parents, I knew both of them.
Okay. What were their names?
My father's mother's name was Emerita, and my father's name was Enoch.
Okay, Rahming.
Enoch. And my mother's name was Olivia.
Okay. What was her maiden name? Your mother's maiden name?
Forbes.
Okay. Forbes from Andros. There's quite a few Forbes from Andros that I know.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were born in Andros?
Born in Blackpoint, Andros.
Okay. And where is that where your parents were from?
Yes.
Both of them? Okay. And your grandparents, were they from Andros as well?
They were from Andros as well.
Okay. So you have a deep Andros history.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. My father's parents had 14 children.
Oh. Okay.
And it's a little difficult for me to recall all of their names, but I knew all of them.
Okay. And they lived in Andros at the time?
They lived in Andros, but several of them went on the contract to the United States in the 40s and 50s. And in fact, I met an uncle in New York when the church choir went there for the first time. I was 15, 16 years old at the time. But yeah, I knew all of them.
Okay.
And my mother had one sister.
Oh, so that was a small family, which was kind of unusual back in those days.
Yes,
Everybody had big families. So your mother had one sister, and she was a Forbes, you said?
She was a Forbes, yes.
Okay, all right. Do you remember what her sister's name was?
Rhoda.
Rhoda?
Yes.
Okay. In Andros, back in those days, what was it like? Can you remember, like, the house you lived in, what it looked like, and what the general area was like?
Well, remember now, I left Andros when I was 6 years old.
Okay,
so I don't have a vast memory. My most telling memory of Blackpoint was the kindness of the residents, because every Friday or every Sabbath, whatever you baked, you would share it with your neighbors, and they would bring the same thing to you, and I recall that.
Okay.
And my most vivid memory is on a Sabbath morning, at the age of about probably 5 and a half, I was walking to church with my cousin, Arnold, whose father had just come from the contract and brought him a new pair of white shoes. And I was walking to church without shoes.
Wow.
And I was walking and looking at those white shoes and saying to myself, boy, I wish I had a pair of shoes. And that memory stayed with me throughout my life, so that when I was appointed ambassador to the OAS in Washington, when I unpacked my luggage and I looked in the closet, I said, I have 14 pairs of shoes.
Wow.
And I recalled when I didn't have any. So that's my most vivid memory.
Yes. Okay. Very, very interesting. So basically, you never went back there to live?
No.
I'm sure you visited?
I visited several times, and when I saw, of course, people had to point out the house to me and say, that's your parents' house. That's where you all used to live.
Okay.
And I'm saying, that's like one little room. How did 10 of us live in there?
Yes.
But we did.
So the house that you lived in, is it still there now?
It's still there. The roof is off, but the house is still there.
Okay, interesting. So I'm sure nobody's in it now. It's just there.
It's just there.
Okay, I would love to see that house just for history's sake. Yeah. Okay. Your parents, you said they moved to Nassau when you were young. What did they do first of all, why did they move?
Greater economic opportunities. My father had been on the contract in the United States for about 20 years and sort of decided to give that up.
Okay.
And he did not have a trade per se, nor did my mother, but they felt that there would be better opportunities in the city. And so they packed all of us up, except one child, Lennis, and we all moved to Nassau.
Okay, so why did Lennis stay?
He stayed with my grandmother, Olivia.
He was a younger one or an older?
No, he's older. He's older. They just had a very, very close bond. And
well, it was nice that somebody stayed with her. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So when you you said your parents didn't really have. What did they do for a living? Like, how did they survive? You said he was on the contract.
He was on the contract, and my mother did subsistence farming.
Okay.
In Andros, and then when they moved to Nassau, my father became a painter, working in the construction industry for quite a while, and my mother became a straw vendor.
Okay, so the farming in Andros, do you remember what it was she farmed? Like, what were the crops?
Well, the amazing thing about Adventists is that a big part of their subsistence is crab farming, but they don't eat it. And so I always found that fascinating. They went crabbing, and they also had a farm where they grew various kinds of vegetables. Okay. And my mother just went to the dock and fished, mostly for our own benefit, as opposed to selling fish. Yeah, but that's how we survived pretty much.
I remember you mentioning that you didn't have shoes. Was it a really difficult life, or did you at least have food every day?
We had food. But we were poor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes, back in the day when people were poor, they knew they were, but it was not like, oh, this is such a horrible thing. They just accepted and lived.
Well, in sociology, there is absolute poverty, and then there's relative poverty.
Right.
So a lot of people are poor in relation to others.
Yes.
In our case, I'd say we were absolutely poor.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And there were so many of you too to feed.
Yes.
You mentioned the Sabbath and Seventh-day Adventism. So you were a Seventh-day Adventist from birth?
Yes.
Okay. Both your parents?
Yes.
What about their parents?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
They were all Adventists. Whoever took Adventism to Andros, South Andros, Pastor McKinney, Pastor Scavala, did a very, very good job. Yeah. Okay. In the case of Blackpoint, at its height, it probably had 30, 40 families, and probably 80% were Adventists, and still are today for the most part.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So was the population bigger back then than it is now? Do you know?
Yeah, there are probably 5 families in Blackpoint today.
Most people moved out.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So when you came to Nassau with your parents and your siblings, where did you live?
We lived through Brougham Street, off east between Market Street and East Street, in a 3-room house.
Is that house still there today?
Yeah, that house is still there today.
Is it occupied?
Yes, it was.
Okay. What was with family, or you sold it all?
My father sold it.
Okay.
We started renting it, and then he was able to buy it, to purchase it, and then he sold it, and then we moved into Yellow Elder Gardens.
Okay. So, Brougham Street, what was that like growing up? How old were you? When you were about 6, and then you stayed there until about how old?
We moved into Yellow Elder in 1969, so we were in Brougham Street about 9 years.
You remember much about it?
Oh yes. In fact, I go through Brougham Street at least once a month when I'm in Nassau. When I live in Nassau, just to see persons who still live there that I knew when we lived there, and just to look at the house and say, boy,
they were the days.
You know, I mean, 10 of us lived in there.
Yeah. So was it a happy childhood there? Were people close?
Very close.
You remember the neighbors? And
very close. All the neighbors were very close. As a matter of fact, the neighbors who lived in the house to the back of us, they had a porch to their house. They had a refrigerator, and they used to sell sodas and other little goodies. So when my friends, Barry Brennan or Tony Roach or Perry DeCosta, Perry Gibson, came to me, I can just take them in the back and offer them a soda. And they thought that's where I lived. They didn't know I lived in the little small house in the front.
Right.
I know I have to pay for the soda when they leave, but I'll just give them a soda.
Yes, okay, that was nice. Memories of those areas, back then everybody was like family, eh?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So when your parents moved here, in order to survive here, had your father left the contract by then, or he was still on the contract?
He was on the contract for a couple of years after we moved to Nassau.
Okay.
But in the early 60s, he discontinued that.
So being on the contract meant that your mother did most of the bringing up, because I guess he was gone most of the time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when he gave that up and came home for good, what did he do to make ends meet? And your mother,
he became a painter.
Oh, you said that.
Yeah,
okay.
he became a painter. And a neighbor through Brougham Street, Mrs. Clark, taught my mother how to stitch bags and how to decorate straw bags. And for a number of years, my mother just made straw work at home, and then after school, we would go to the straw market and sell it to the vendors. And then thereafter, my mom got a stall in the market and spent close to 50 years in the straw market.
What was her name again?
Daisy.
Daisy, okay. All right, so they both had an income and they both worked hard, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what about schooling? I assume you continue to attend the Seventh Adventist Church here. Which church did you go to?
Well, we started off at Elliston. Then I broke away and went to Grantstown because Barry and I and Tony, we formed a quartet. And so because that's where they went to church, that's why I started going to church.
Okay.
And so I was at Grantstown for a good number of years.
Okay. So what about schooling? Where did you go to school? Here.
Once we came to Nassau, my father had this very irrational idea to send 4 of us to Bahamas Academy. He couldn't afford to send 1 of us, but he sent 4 of us to Bahamas Academy, and they started me off in class 1 with Mavis DeVoe as my first teacher. And so there's class 1, class 2, then grade 1, grade 2. So that's where I had my beginning, really.
Okay. So after, the rest of your siblings, I assume, just went to public schools or government schools, as we call them here, and while 4 of you went to
No. My older brothers were then working.
Oh, they were okay.
Yeah.
They were older. Okay. Because usually you left school really early back in those days.
Yeah, no. My oldest brother left school when he was 14. My other brother got a chance to get a job. And then my third brother was still in Andros.
Okay. So everyone who was left went to Bahamas Academy. Okay. So what happened after Bahamas Academy? Did you finish?
No. When I was about 15, the Grantstown Church Choir got an invitation to perform in Syracuse, New York. And my uncle, whom I had never met, lived in Rochester, New York. And so once I knew I was going to New York, I contacted him and invited him to the concert. He and his wife came, and he said, why don't you come here and go to school? And I thought, I don't have any money. He said, no, we'll sort that out. So I came back home and told my parents I was going to live with Uncle Clarence. And I went to New York, and they took me to this college prep school which is under the auspices of State University of New York. And they gave me an entrance test. I passed it, and I did that for 2 years and graduated and came back home with my college prep certificate.
Okay, very interesting. That was an boy, I tell you, life is something, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, so you finished that and then you came home.
Yeah.
And then what?
I got a job with the Ministry of Education as an untrained teacher. And I taught at William Phipps Primary School. And then I got a job at the Tribune and as a news reporter. And you know, so every night my name would be plastered on the front page with my byline, and I thought, I have no need to go to college. So Barry went off to college, Tony Roach went off to college, and I dismissed the idea. But the conference, Bahamas Conference, had a...
This is the Bahamas Conference of 7th Avenue?
Yeah, had a convention at the R.M. Bailey Auditorium. And somehow somebody asked me to give a speech on something. And after I spoke, a gentleman walked up to me and introduced himself as Dr. D.L. Dwyer from Jamaica. He said, I'm not sure why I came to this conference, but after listening to you speak, I know why you came. Where did you go to university? I said, well, actually, I haven't been to university. He said, what do you do? I said, I work as a news reporter. He said, that's why I came to this conference. Because you are prostituting your talent. You are writing the news, but I see you being able to make news. You need to go to college. And it just mushroomed from there.
So for the second time in your life, somebody just came and just planted something in you that you needed to do.
Yeah.
And you pursued it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then you decided you would go off to college. And where did you go?
I went to Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, Florida.
And what did you study?
Sociology.
Okay, why sociology? Like, what made you choose that?
When I was a news reporter, many of my assignments were at the court. And I would sit in court and I would say to myself, I don't want to become a lawyer, but I want to work with criminals. And so I decided, okay, well, I'll study sociology with a minor in criminal justice to work perhaps at the prison or something like that. And then along the way, I heard of this thing called criminology. I had never heard of it before. And I said, that's it. Okay. I want to become the Bahamas' first criminologist. That's what I'm going to do.
I don't even know of anybody else that did it. Is there anybody else?
A few persons got their master's degree in criminology. Yeah.
Okay, well, I always associated with only you.
Yeah.
Because I knew you were the only one, and I hadn't heard anything else.
Yeah.
But I always wondered, how was he smart enough to choose that? Because nobody else did it. You know? And that's very interesting, and now I see the connection with you being a reporter. So you did sociology, and then I guess then you did the criminology afterward?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then you do it right after the other one?
Yeah, when I graduated, well, actually, I represented a number of students in university as their lawyer, although I was not a lawyer.
Okay.
You know, the school has these rules, and then you go before the presidential tribunal, and then you can have somebody represent you.
Okay.
And so students charged with smoking marijuana or whatever, they got me to represent them, and I charged them a fee.
Okay.
And so the entire administration thought I would go into law, but I was determined I didn't want to do that. But I took the law school admissions test, did well on it. But once I was accepted to Washington University in St. Louis, I went to the president of the university. We had a very close relationship, and I told him, I said, Dr. Bronson, I'm going off to graduate school. He said, what are you going to study? And I told him, he said, no. If you were going to do law, I'll help you. But you're wasting your time. And a week before I was supposed to go off, I went back to him. And he called the secretary into the office, because I had no money. My parents had no money. He called the secretary into the office. He said, "Ms. Locklear, I want you to make some phone calls for me." And I'm sitting in his office, and he said, "Call Jack Davis, who was then president of City Markets in Dixie." He said, "Mr. Davis, Oswald Bronson here. I have a young man in the office. He just graduated from Bethune-Cookman. He wants to go off to graduate school. He's going to be Prime Minister of the Bahamas one day. And I'm trying to raise some money for him. Can I count on you for $1,000? And he said, "Yes." And he called 14 persons.
Wow.
13 of them said yes. And so he just reached in his drawer, took his checkbook, and wrote me a check for $13,000. And I went to the bank the next day and I changed that. And I'm walking back to campus feeling extremely rich.
I can imagine.
Not knowing that was only enough for one semester, really. Because Washington University is very expensive.
What year was that?
1978.
Okay.
And so I went to university, and I'm standing on the line to pay my tuition. And also, Washington University is about 90% white. So most of the students are paying with credit cards or scholarship grants and so forth. So when I got to the window and I started counting this money, I heard when this girl behind me said his father must be an African king or something. And then finished the semester. I'm out of money. I went to the dean. I said, "I guess I'm going back to the Bahamas." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I don't have any money." He said, "Man, we have millions of dollars in scholarships, but they're all reserved for Americans, for U.S. citizens. So let me see what I could do." A week later, he called me. He said, "There's a test called the Miller's Analogies Test. Take that test, and if you do well, I think I can help you." I took the test. A week later, he said, "There's an organization in New York called the Guggenheim Foundation. We contacted them. They've agreed to give you a full fellowship,
Wow.
pay all of your tuition, and give you $800 a month in your pocket."
Wow.
That's how I did. That's how I did graduate school.
Wow. That is quite a story. You've been blessed, I must say. And then when you complete criminology, when you study that, if you complete a course in that, what exactly is the best suited job for someone who has those qualifications? Because, people may have different ideas as to what it is that you do.
Yeah. Well, actually, there are several branches in criminology. One is criminalistics, which is the technical side. In other words, crime scenes investigation, that kind of thing, right? Criminology is the administration of a facility, of a correctional facility, or dealing directly with criminals, testifying in court as to state of mind, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I assume there's probably a lot of psychology involved
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely.
The way they think and how you could, I guess analyze actions and that kind of stuff. Must be very interesting.
Right.
Do you have to go through, when you do that, a period of actual working with those kinds of people, or is it just all bookmark?
Yeah, you need to do a practicum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
An extended practicum. Yep.
Okay. So when you were done with all of that, you came back home right away, or did you stay in the U.S. for a while?
When I was done with that, well, before I was finished, I wrote and applied for a job in the Bahamas. I got a letter offering me a job, and my wife at the time, an American lady, had a very, very nice job as head of respiratory therapy at a hospital. And we had just gotten married, and I convinced her to move to the Bahamas. And went for a meeting with Sir Clement Maynard, who was the Minister of Home Affairs at the time. And he said, "We have a problem." I said, "We have a problem?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "The job that you were offered is a new post." And I didn't realize I had to take it to cabinet. And I didn't take it to cabinet. And I'm not sure when I could get it on the cabinet agenda. So there's nothing I could do for you right now. Why don't you, but I can send you on the police force, but you're going to have to go through basic training. And when you finish that, we will let you begin as an assistant superintendent. So-called direct entry, they call it. And I said to myself, Sir Clement's son just finished his PhD, and he's working for the Bahamas government at the embassy in Washington. And he wants me to go and join the police force.
Something wrong with that picture.
So I started teaching at COB part-time. And then I got in to meet Sir Lyndon, and I told him how displeased I was that nothing was happening, really. And one afternoon, Margaret MacDonald, the Secretary of the Cabinet, called me and said, the Prime Minister wants to see you, but it's 4:45. I said I could be there in 5 minutes. And I just tore Nassau Street up. And then I got there, said the Prime Minister is just up to here in work. He's looking for somebody to come on as his special assistant. And he has you in mind. Would you be interested in that? I said, would I be interested?
Hello.
So that's how that happened.
Yeah, very interesting. And at this point, you didn't have your doctorate yet, right?
Yes.
Oh, you okay?
When I came back home, I had my doctorate.
Oh, that was already completed.
Yes.
Okay. So you did that, and then for a while, and then what happened? Because I distinctly remember when you did become when you were in charge of the prison. Okay.
Well, what happened was I worked with Sir Lyndon for 4 years as his special assistant, primarily responsible for speech writing.
Okay.
And doing some sociological studies for him as well. But then I went away to a conference and I made a presentation, and a lady walked up to me and said, my name is Yvonne Ragland. I am president of the Miami YMCA, and we're looking for an executive director for the Miami YMCA. And listening to your presentation, you seem like the exact person that we need. Because we want a black person, but the black Americans have a chip on their shoulder. You don't seem to have a chip on your shoulder. Would you be interested? I said, put it in writing. I got a letter. I took it to Sir Lyndon. He said, boy, I can't match that salary. I can't match that salary, and I don't want to stand in your way. As much as I hate to see you go, I understand. So I resigned and went to Miami, and everything was going well. And then I was going through a divorce procedure, and Miles Monroe said to me, I know your job over is important and all that, but your son needs you. And I packed up and came back home without a job.
Wow, so your son was here.
Yeah.
What was it like working for Sir Lyndon Pindling?
It was perhaps the greatest experience of my life.
Wow.
Sir Lyndon is a very good teacher. He gave us tremendous opportunities. He took me around the world. Many places I probably would never have seen, I saw because of Sir Lyndon. I think he valued my ability. Given some assignments that he gave me, I would say that. It also taught me that when you're in certain positions, you have to live up to people's expectations. So, for example, there's certain things people don't expect the special assistant to the Prime Minister to do. or certain places they don't expect him to be. So it has a management component.
There was a lot of discipline involved, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. At some point, you mentioned your criminology and your you were an educator for a short time. How did you get to go to the prison now? When you came back, you said you didn't have a job. When you were asked to come back because your son needed you.
Yeah, I was at the post office one day, and Paul Adley walked up to me and he said, "What you doing now?" I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything." He said, "Okay, call me in 2 weeks." And I called him in 2 weeks, and he said, "I put something to cabinet. We're going to bring you on at National Security as consultant advisor on crime." This was in 1989, and I became the consultant advisor to the Ministry of National Security. And then around early 92, Darrell Roll had become the Minister of National Security, and he convinced me to run for Parliament. And as a public servant, you have to resign in order to run. So I resigned, thinking that, well, I may lose my seat, but the PLP will win the election. I resigned, I lost, and the party lost.
Wow.
So Lyndon then said, the party needs proper management. So I was hired as the Secretary General of the party, and I was also appointed to the Senate. And so I did that. And I also started Respect Academy.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
A high school on Danes Lane. That went well. And then in 2000, my secretary said to me, "Mr. Perry Christie is out there to see you." I said, "Well, really?" So I walked out, and there was Perry Christie. Came into my office. He said, "Man, I consider this my one opportunity to be Prime Minister of the Bahamas. Why don't you come into my office and help make me Prime Minister?" And at the time, I said, "Respect Academy. I'm saving this for my daughter. I had a daughter as well, who was then in high school. But when she graduated from college, I wanted to come and take this school over. That's my dream. Now you're asking me to help you fulfill your dream." But I sold the school to Reverend Reuben Cooper. He then took it on Blake Road. It's now Westminster College.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And I went into Christie's office. I occupied the office that Hubert Ingram used to occupy in the law office. And now it's 2002, and we won the election. And so I became Christie's special assistant in the Prime Minister's office. And then in 2005, I went off to a conference, came back, and on my way from the airport, Candia Dames called me and said, "How come you weren't at the press conference?" I said, "What press conference?" She said, "Don't tell me you don't know." I said, "No, what?" She said, "Mother Pratt just held a press conference and said that you're the new head of the prison."
What? And you knew nothing about it?
That's how it happened.
Yeah. Interesting. Because she was
the Minister of National Security then, yes.
Okay. So how long did you do that for?
8 years, 2005 to 2013.
Okay, so now we're getting closer to now. Okay. And then what happened after that?
Well, in 2013, my secretary said, "The Prime Minister wants to see you." Very Christie again. And so I went to see him the following day, and we just talked, because I've always had a very excellent relationship with Prime Minister Christie. He's a very good friend. I thought he was probably one of the smartest persons I've met. I always told people, if I had to go on the show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you needed somebody you could call, it'd probably be Perry Christie, because he knows a lot about a lot of things. And so then when he got serious, he said, someone told me that you're not happy at the prison. I didn't know exactly what that meant. So I said, well, Prime Minister, I wouldn't say that I'm unhappy, but it's been almost 10 years. He said, oh, because if you're unhappy, I was thinking of sending you to Washington. I said, Prime Minister, I'm very unhappy. Very, very unhappy.
Yeah, now that you say so. Right? Okay. So that began your ambassadorship, eh?
Yeah.
And you've been an ambassador on a number of occasions.
Well, I was appointed ambassador to the United States and the Organization of American States. I then, some weeks later, requested that I switch with Dr. Nuri, who was the ambassador of the UN, and the government agreed. Okay. So we made that switch. But I retained the OAS portfolio. So I was commuting between Washington and New York with the twin portfolios of ambassador to the OAS and ambassador to the UN. And then in 2017, we lost the election. And of course, we were recalled. And then after we won the election in 2021, I was offered the position of ambassador to the Republic of Cuba.
Okay. Yeah. So I was always curious about ambassadors. Obviously, I would think that they would always choose people that they think could represent us well. Is there specific training that they make you do, or is it, or you kind of learn on the job, or how does that work?
Well, basically there are two kinds of ambassadors. There's the career diplomat who becomes an ambassador, somebody who grows up in the Foreign Service. Okay. And then there's the political appointee, right? And the political appointee is the person who represents the interests of the sitting government. But of course, you still have to go through certain aspects of training in diplomacy.
Exactly.
And so there are training modules that one would go through for that. And then, of course, you've got professional Foreign Service officers that work in the embassy. So in terms of the technical aspects of the work of the ambassador mainly is to be the face and the voice of the government of the Bahamas in that particular place. Okay. Yeah.
And obviously they have to choose well because you are the face and the voice. Yes. Right, okay. Yes. So you are now in Cuba.
Yes.
Okay. What has that experience been like? Prior to now it was the US and
the OAS in Washington and the UN in New York. Okay. If I had a choice between, well, let's put it this way, I prefer Cuba.
Really? Okay.
Cuba is a hardship post for a number of reasons, but diplomats in Cuba get a lot of respect. And there are a lot of diplomats. Cuba has about 120 embassies.
Oh, wow.
Diplomacy is very highly valued in Cuba.
I can imagine.
Yeah, let me put it that way. There are shortages in food and a number of things like that. The creature comforts that you may enjoy in the Bahamas you don't have, but the people are very friendly. And above all else, Cuba is very safe.
Good.
For example, I was just telling somebody last week, the murder rate in Cuba is almost irreducibly low compared to anywhere else. When I go to bed at night, I say to myself, boy, if somebody breaks into this house, they'll probably stab me, but they're not going to shoot me because they ain't got no gun.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me how a country of 11 million people could police itself to the extent that I could predict that the odds of being shot in Cuba are near zero.
Wow.
Or you can see women hitchhiking all hours of the night. People who work shifts, they get off and they standing on the road hitchhiking without a worry as to somebody's going to accost them. Or, it's not to say that it's far from a perfect society, but it's a highly regulated society and a well-ordered society.
Right. So being highly regulated and well-ordered, you think, is what accounts for the low crime rate and murder rate?
Yes. Yes.
Well,
yes.
I guess that's understandable, which is much of that is what we have lost here. And I suppose we have become so westernized and everybody wants the freedom, right? And with the freedom comes a lot of things that we really don't want coming along with it. You have been truly blessed.
God has been good.
You have an interesting, and you wrote, was it a couple of books or was it more than one? Right?
I wrote a book and then I did an update.
What was the name of the book?
The 100 Greatest Blacks Who Ever Lived.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first one was more linked to Bahamians, right?
No.
Both of them were into
worldwide.
Okay.
Worldwide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Only 2 Bahamians made it in the book, actually. Well, if I can just add something, I think I have the record as the only Bahamian who's ever walked around Nassau alone to raise money to go to college.
Wow.
And I did that on a Sunday, starting at Yamacraw Beach at 4 o'clock in the morning, straight to Clifton Pier and back, and arrived back to Yamacraw Beach about 8 o'clock that night. I went to persons in advance, and then Kendall Isaacs, businessman, and said, listen, I want to go to college. I'm going to have a one-man walkathon. Would you sponsor
it was
me?
a walkathon, okay.
Yeah, and they'd say, okay, I'd give you, $10 a mile or $1 a mile or whatever. And one of the greatest lessons of my life was on that walkathon. When I got to Clifton Pier, my father pulled up and he gave me 2 tuna sandwiches and a mayonnaise jar of lemonade.
Okay.
And I said to him, Daddy, there's no one here. Just let me lay down in the back seat of the car and drive me to Golden Gates, and then I'll walk the rest of the way. And Daddy said, no. You said you're going to walk. Now, if you're tired, if you don't feel good, and you want to stop, then fine. Everybody would understand that you didn't finish the walk. But I'm not going to put you in the back seat of the car, take you to Golden Gates, and make it appear to the public that you walked the whole way.
That's integrity.
And he pulled off.
He taught you that day. 3
minutes after Daddy pulled off, the Tribune photographer.
Wow.
This is a historical fact. And that photo is at the Tribune today of me on that walk.
Wow.
And he would not have gotten that photo if I had gone in that car.
Your father did you a very good justice that day.
That's correct.
And taught you a good lesson.
That is right.
Very interesting.
Dr. Rahming has served as president of the Bahamas Who's Who Society, president of the Bahamas Social Workers Association, and national chairman of the Bahamas Duke of Edinburgh, now Governor General's Youth Awards Program. He was a member of the National Crime Commission and headed the Prison Reform Commission. Dr. Rahming is an inductee into Who's Who among students in American colleges and universities, the National Dean's List USA, and he was chosen as one of Bethune-Cookman University's 100 most outstanding graduates. He is profiled in Jones Communications' commemorative book, Bahamian Living Legends. He has a string of publications to his credit, including the book Breaking Glass Ceilings, Top 100 Black Achievers Who Changed the World. At the recording of this video in September of 2024, he is the Bahamas Ambassador to the Republic of Cuba. Bahamian Heritage Series salutes His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Elliston Rahming. The legacy continues.